The whisper reached Harriet Thorne before the music stopped. "Did you see? The Duke is coming this way." Her stomach dropped, not toward the glittering circle of debutantes, not toward her sister who laughed beneath the chandeliers like sunlight, toward the shadows. Toward her. Harriet pressed herself closer to the ivy-wrapped column at the edge of the Countess of Petton's ballroom. It was the place she always stood, half hidden, half forgotten. Her gown, dull pewter, deliberately lifeless, blended almost perfectly with the wallpaper behind her. She had chosen it with care. A color no one remembered, a color that vanished beneath candlelight. For 8 years, Harriet Thorne had cultivated the art of disappearing, and she had become excellent at it, which was why the sight unfolding across the ballroom felt like some terrible mistake. Because Alistair Cavendish, the Duke of Northcliffe, was walking directly toward her. The crowd parted before him. Men stepped aside. Women lowered their fans. Whispers rippled like wind through silk skirts. The coldest duke in England did not cross ballrooms without purpose. He did not pursue women. He certainly did not seek out the daughter of a minor baronet who had long ago been declared socially invisible. Harriet's pulse began to hammer. He must be going somewhere behind me. But he did not turn, did not slow, did not look away. His gaze remained fixed on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch painfully in her throat. 8 years ago, she had still believed someone might look at her like that. 8 years ago, she had been 17. And foolish. The memory struck her like a blade. The Bancroft ball, the laughter, Lord Christopher Ashby bowing mockingly before 300 guests and announcing loudly that dancing with Harriet Thorne was like dancing with a piece of furniture. The room had roared. Her mother had slapped her later in the carriage. "You humiliated us," Lady Meredith Thorne had hissed. "How dare you draw attention to yourself?" After that night, Harriet learned a lesson that society taught cruelly and well. A woman who failed to charm the room quickly learned to vanish from it too. So she changed. Darker gowns, severe hair, quiet corners. No dancing, no laughter, no hope. 8 years of silence had made her nearly perfect at being overlooked. Until tonight, because now the Duke of Northcliffe stood before her. Close enough that she could smell sandalwood and winter rain. Close enough that the warmth of his presence made the cold marble column behind her feel suddenly distant. Up close, he was even more intimidating than rumor suggested. Tall, severe, his gray eyes sharp as winter storms. A faint scar cut across the edge of his jaw. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The ballroom had begun to quiet. People were watching. Of course they were watching. The most powerful bachelor in England was standing before the most forgettable woman in London. Then the Duke leaned closer. So close his voice brushed the shell of her ear. "I have always seen you." The word shattered something inside her. Harriet blinked. Surely she had misheard. "You're mistaken," she said quietly. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, rusted from disuse. "I am no one, Your Grace." Something dark flickered in his expression. "No," he said softly. "You have never been no one." He straightened. And in one calm motion that caused 3 nearby ladies to gasp into their fans, he offered his hand. "Dance with me." It was not a question. Harriet stared at his gloved hand. She had not danced in 8 years. Not since the night laughter followed her across the floor like thrown stones. The orchestra began another waltz. The first notes floated through the ballroom. The Duke waited, unmoving, entirely certain. Around them whispers spread. Why her? Does he know who she is? She has been on the shelf for years. Harriet's heart pounded. Every instinct told her to refuse, to retreat, to return to the shadows where humiliation could not reach her again. But his eyes held hers, not impatient, not mocking, waiting, as though this moment mattered more to him than the entire glittering room. Her hand lifted before she could stop it. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, and suddenly Harriet Thorne, who had spent 8 years dissolving into walls and corners, found herself being led directly into the center of the ballroom. Gasps rippled outward. The Duke placed one hand at her waist. The other held her gloved fingers. His touch was careful, almost reverent. "Breathe," he murmured. She hadn't realized she'd stopped. "I cannot do this," she whispered. "You can." The orchestra swelled. The dance began, and Harriet discovered something impossible. Her body remembered. Step. Turn. Step. The Duke moved with controlled precision, guiding her effortlessly through the waltz. But he never once looked away from her face. Not once. "You are wondering why," he said quietly. "Yes, I will tell you," he replied. "Not tonight." That hardly seems fair. No, he agreed calmly. It isn't. The music spun around them. Candles blurred. Silk rustled. The entire ballroom watched. How long? She asked suddenly. His jaw tightened. Since the Bancroft ball. Her breath caught. That was 8 years ago. Yes, 8 years. 8 years of invisibility. 8 years of silence. 8 years while the coldest duke in England had apparently been watching her disappear. The music ended. Applause broke around them. But Harriet barely heard it. Her heart thundered, because he was still looking at her, still studying her as if she were the only person alive. I have waited long enough, the Duke said quietly, and Harriet realized something terrifying. The look in his eyes was not curiosity. It was devotion. Harriet ran. The moment the applause rose around them, she pulled her hand from the Duke's grasp and fled the dance floor before her courage failed completely. Gasps followed her retreat. Fans snapped open. Whispers bloomed like wildfire. But Harriet barely heard them. Her pulse roared in her ears as she hurried through the crowd, past startled guests and curious glances, toward the narrow servants' corridor she had used countless times to slip unnoticed from crowded rooms. Invisible again. Safe again. She reached the garden doors and pushed outside into the cool night air. Moonlight silvered the hedges. The distant music of the ballroom drifted faintly through the glass. Harriet pressed her back against the stone wall beside a rose arbor and forced herself to breathe. 8 years. 8 years, he had said. It was impossible. Men like the Duke of Northcliffe did not watch women like her. They certainly did not wait for them. Her hands trembled. You run very quickly for someone who claims she does not dance. Harriet started violently. The Duke stood at the entrance to the arbor. Moonlight carved sharp lines across his features, softening none of them. He had followed her. Of course he had. The most powerful man in England did not allow mysteries to escape him. I apologize, he said quietly. I should not have overwhelmed you. You did not overwhelm me. She lifted her chin, though her voice shook. You frightened me. His expression softened, only slightly. That was never my intention. Silence stretched between them. Somewhere deeper in the garden, a nightingale sang. I must return inside, Harriet said quickly. My absence will already be noted. Yes, he agreed. But before you disappear again, there is something you deserve to know. He stepped closer, not enough to crowd her, just enough that the air between them grew warmer. I meant what I said, he continued. I have always seen you. That is absurd. It is the truth. She shook her head. You cannot possibly know anything about me. I know, he said calmly. That you read philosophy in secret because your mother believes intellectual pursuits unsuitable for women. Harriet's breath caught. I know you taught yourself Latin from your father's books. He took another step. I know you manage your family's accounts because no one else in that house possesses the discipline to do so. Her back pressed harder against the stone. Help! I know, he continued quietly, that you gave up half your dowry so your sister might have a proper wardrobe for her first season. Her chest tightened. That is not something anyone told you. No. Then how? Because I have spent 8 years learning everything about you. The words hung in the night air, not boastful, not proud, simply true. Harriet stared at him. You cannot mean that. I do. Why? For the first time, the Duke hesitated. Then he answered. Because the night Lord Ashby laughed at you, he said slowly. I was standing above the ballroom gallery. Her heart stopped. I saw the moment it happened. She swallowed. That must have been amusing. No. His voice hardened. It was the most infuriating thing I had ever witnessed. He looked away briefly, as though remembering. You did not cry. No, she said faintly. You did not run. No. You walked through 300 people who believed themselves superior to you, he continued, with your spine straight and your chin lifted. He looked back at her, and in that moment I realized something. What? That I had never seen anyone stronger. Harriet blinked. Strong. No one had ever called her that before. I was 25 then, he went on. My father had just died, my brother was gone. The estates were drowning in debt. His voice lowered. I believed I was going to destroy everything my family had built. The moonlight caught his eyes. You walked through humiliation with more courage than I possessed facing my entire inheritance. He paused, and I thought, if she can survive that, then I can survive this. Her breath trembled. So you watched me? Yes. For 8 years? Yes. Why wait so long to speak? Something softened in his expression. Because I needed to become a man worthy of you. Harriet laughed softly. The sound held no humor. You are a duke. I was a broken boy with a title and mountains of debt. And now, he said quietly, I have rebuilt everything. Silence settled again. The garden smelled faintly of roses and damp earth. You still should not be interested in me, Harriet said. I have no fortune. I have more than enough. No beauty. His gaze swept her face. You are mistaken. No position. You will have mine. Her heart skipped painfully. You speak as if this has already been decided. He reached out slowly, carefully, as though approaching a frightened creature. Give me 1 month, he said. 1 month to court you properly. Harriet's pulse thundered. And if I refuse? His expression did not change. Then I will wait. For how long? He held her gaze. I have already waited 8 years. The certainty in his voice terrified her. And yet, something inside her stirred. Something fragile. Something dangerously close to hope. 1 month, she whispered. Relief flickered briefly in his eyes. Tomorrow morning, he said, I will call upon you. Harriet's breath caught again. He turned to leave, then paused. Miss Thorne. Yes? His voice softened. You are not invisible. She watched him disappear into the moonlit garden, and for the first time in 8 years, Harriet Thorne wondered if perhaps she had never truly been unseen at all. The Duke of Northcliffe arrived the next morning precisely at 11, not a minute early, not a minute late. His carriage, glossy black with the Cavendish crest blazing across the door, stopped before the modest Thorne townhouse with such dramatic finality that 3 neighbors immediately appeared at their windows. Inside, chaos erupted. The Duke, Lady Meredith Thorne repeated faintly. The teacup in her hand rattled against its saucer. Yes, my lady, the butler said carefully. His Grace requests Miss Harriet. The room fell silent. Dorothea looked delighted. Lady Meredith looked as though she had swallowed a lemon. Harriet simply stood there, stunned. He must be mistaken, her mother said briskly. Dorothea is right here. I am not mistaken. The voice came from the doorway, deep, controlled, entirely confident. The Duke of Northcliffe had entered the drawing room. Lady Meredith nearly rose from her seat so quickly she tipped the tea table. Your Grace. His bow was polite but minimal. His attention never left Harriet. Miss Thorne. Harriet felt suddenly aware of everything. Her plain gray dress, her tightly pinned hair, the fact that the most powerful bachelor in England was looking at her as if she were the only person present. My daughter Dorothea, Lady Meredith began eagerly. I have already met Miss Dorothea, the Duke said calmly. Dorothea curtsied, hiding a smile. I'm here for Miss Harriet. The silence that followed could have cracked glass. Lady Meredith blinked. You wish to speak with her? I wish to take her driving in Hyde Park. Harriet's heart jolted. Her mother's face tightened instantly. A chaperone will be required, of course. Certainly. The Duke glanced at Dorothea. Miss Dorothea would be welcome to join us. Dorothea brightened. Lady Meredith looked faintly murderous. 10 minutes later, Harriet found herself seated across from the Duke in his carriage. Dorothea sat beside her like an enthusiastic conspirator. Outside, London rolled past in a blur of spring sunlight and polished carriage wheels. Inside, the air felt strangely electric. You truly came, Harriet said quietly. I said I would. That hardly means most men do. His mouth curved faintly. I am not most men. Dorothea leaned forward eagerly. I must say, Your Grace, all of London is speaking about last night. Is it? Oh, yes. She lowered her voice dramatically. They say the cold Duke of Northcliffe has finally chosen a bride. Harriet flushed crimson. That is ridiculous. Is it? Dorothea asked sweetly. The Duke watched Harriet carefully. I have chosen someone, he said quietly. Her pulse skipped. Have you? Yes. Dorothea gasped softly. Harriet tried very hard not to look at him. They reached Hyde Park moments later. The carriage stopped beside the tree-lined path. The Duke stepped down first and offered his hand. This time Harriet did not hesitate before taking it. The warmth of his fingers sent an unfamiliar tremor through her. Dorothea followed cheerfully. They began walking beneath the budding spring trees. You read Kant, the Duke said suddenly. Harriet blinked. Excuse me? Kant. Your copy of Critique of Pure Reason is heavily annotated. Dorothea stared. You read Kant? Harriet's ears burned. It was curiosity. I found your notes brilliant. She stopped walking. You read my notes? His expression remained calm. I borrowed the book. You stole my book. I returned it. Dorothea burst into laughter. Harriet stared at him in disbelief. You truly have been studying me. For 8 years. His tone carried no embarrassment, only certainty. She resumed walking slowly. You do realize that sounds rather alarming. Yes, and yet you say it so calmly. Because I have never lied to you. The path curved through the park. Birdsong drifted through the branches. Carriages rolled quietly along the road nearby. For a moment, the three of them walked in silence. Then Dorothea suddenly slowed. Oh dear. Harriet looked back. What is it? I appear to have twisted my ankle. The Duke's brow lifted slightly. Shall I call the carriage? Oh no, Dorothea said quickly. I will sit here on this bench until you return. Harriet blinked. You cannot sit here alone. I insist. Dorothea gave her a meaningful look. You and His Grace should finish your walk. And before Harriet could protest further, her sister settled onto the bench with suspicious enthusiasm. The Duke watched the exchange with mild amusement. She is very loyal, he said quietly. Harriet sighed. Yes. They continued walking, now alone. The silence between them felt heavier. You are afraid, he observed. I am cautious. Because you believe this will end? Yes. He stopped walking. Harriet turned to face him. The sunlight caught in his gray eyes. Harriet, he said quietly. I did not wait 8 years to lose you in 8 days. Her heart stumbled. You speak as though the outcome is inevitable. It is. His voice softened. You simply have not realized it yet. And Harriet felt the first dangerous crack appear in the careful wall she had built around her heart. The crack in Harriet's carefully guarded composure widened 3 days later. Not because of the Duke, but because of her mother. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Thorne drawing room as Harriet sealed a letter addressed to the Duke of Northcliffe. Their courtship had settled into an unusual rhythm. Morning walks, afternoon conversations, occasional debates about philosophy that left Harriet breathless with excitement. He listened to her, not politely, not indulgently, but with genuine interest, as though her mind were something rare and valuable. No one had ever done that before, which was why her mother's voice, slicing through the quiet room, struck like ice. Dorothea will accompany you today. Harriet froze. Mother? Lady Meredith sat at the writing desk with the posture of a general preparing for battle. I think His Grace has spent quite enough time distracted by novelty. The word stung. Novelty? Harriet repeated. Yes, Lady Meredith said crisply. Your peculiar appeal. Dorothea stiffened across the room. Mother. Hush, Dorothea. Lady Meredith turned to Harriet. You must understand something, my dear. Dukes do not marry women like you. Harriet felt the familiar cold weight settle in her chest. Women like you. She knew exactly what that meant. Plain, invisible, forgettable. Lady Meredith continued smoothly. His Grace has clearly been intrigued. Mother, Dorothea said sharply. But intrigue fades. Her mother's gaze sharpened. Once he spends proper time with your sister, he will remember what a suitable bride actually looks like. Silence crashed into the room. Harriet's stomach tightened painfully. Very well, she said quietly. Dorothea spun toward her. Harry, you cannot be serious. It does not matter, Harriet said. But it did, because something fragile had begun growing in her chest during the past week. Hope. And hope was a dangerous thing for someone who had survived by expecting nothing. The Duke arrived 15 minutes later. Lady Meredith greeted him with exaggerated warmth. Your Grace, how delightful. He bowed politely. Then his eyes found Harriet. The room disappeared. For a moment they simply looked at one another, until Lady Meredith spoke again. My younger daughter will accompany you today. Dorothea gave him an apologetic look. The Duke studied Harriet carefully. Miss Harriet, he said quietly. Is that your wish? The question surprised her. No one had ever asked what she wanted before. Yes, she said after a moment. His expression did not change, but something thoughtful flickered behind his eyes. Very well. They left together moments later. The carriage ride felt tense. Dorothea attempted cheerful conversation. The Duke responded politely, but Harriet could feel the undercurrent of tension humming through the small space. Finally, the Duke spoke. Your mother believes I will choose your sister. Dorothea looked mortified. Harriet closed her eyes briefly. Yes. Does she also believe I am blind? Dorothea coughed. Harriet tried not to smile. I assure you, he continued calmly. Miss Dorothea is very charming. Dorothea brightened. Thank you, Your Grace. But she's not the woman I came for. His gaze returned to Harriet. The carriage suddenly felt very small. Dorothea stared between them. Oh! They arrived at Lady Whitmore's garden party shortly afterward. Spring roses filled the air with perfume. Guests wandered along gravel paths beneath flowering arches, and for the first time since their courtship began, Harriet noticed something unsettling. People were watching them, not ignoring her, watching, studying, whispering. The Duke walked beside her with quiet authority. His hand occasionally brushed hers. Each touch sent warmth racing through her, until another voice interrupted. "Miss Thorne." Harriet turned. Lord Henry Blackwood stood before them with a confident smile. He bowed. "Allow me to introduce myself." The Duke's posture shifted subtly. Protective. Alert. "Lord Blackwood," Harriet said politely. "I was hoping you might grant me a walk through the rose garden." Before she could answer, "Miss Thorne is already engaged." The Duke's voice was calm, but cold. Blackwood chuckled. "Surely you do not intend to monopolize the lady's attention, Northcliffe." "I do." The word fell like steel. The surrounding guests went silent. Blackwood's smile faltered. "That hardly seems fair." "Fairness," the Duke replied coolly, "is not a factor when it concerns Miss Thorne." Harriet should have been offended. She should have objected to being spoken of like something claimed. Instead, her heart raced, because the look in his eyes was unmistakable, possessive, fierce, and utterly certain. Blackwood muttered an apology and withdrew. The Duke exhaled slowly. "My apologies," he said to Harriet. "I should not have spoken for you." She looked up at him and smiled. "I rather enjoyed it." His eyes widened slightly. "After 8 years of being invisible," she continued softly, "it is strangely satisfying to watch someone defend my existence." Something warm flickered across his usually controlled expression. "You will never be invisible again," he said quietly. The certainty in his voice made her breath catch, but neither of them noticed the woman watching from across the garden. Lady Meredith Thorne. Her eyes narrowed, and slowly, a calculating smile spread across her face. Lady Meredith did not wait long to act. The following morning, Harriet found her mother seated at the breakfast table with an expression that made Dorothea immediately wary. Lady Meredith only looked that pleased when she believed she had won something. "My dear," she said smoothly, buttering her toast, "I have written a letter." Harriet did not like the sound of that. "To whom?" Dorothea asked carefully. Lady Meredith lifted her eyes. "To Lord Christopher Ashby." The name hit Harriet like cold water. For a moment the room spun. "You cannot mean that," Harriet said quietly. "Oh, but I do." Lady Meredith folded her napkin with elegant precision. "I thought it might be helpful for His Grace to hear the truth about your unfortunate debut season." Dorothea pushed back her chair sharply. "That was 8 years ago." "Yes," Lady Meredith said calmly, "which makes it all the more believable." Harriet's hands trembled. "What exactly have you told him?" "Nothing yet," her mother replied lightly, "but Lord Ashby remembers the evening very well." The memory returned like a bruise. The crowded ballroom, Ashby's cruel laughter, 300 people watching her humiliation unfold. "You know perfectly well what happened," Harriet whispered. "Yes," Lady Meredith said. "You embarrassed yourself." "That is not what happened." "Perception," Lady Meredith said coldly, "is what matters in society." Dorothea stood abruptly. "Mother, this is monstrous." "Monstrous?" Lady Meredith's smile sharpened. "What would be monstrous is allowing Harriet to trap the Duke of Northcliffe into marriage." Harriet's chest tightened. "You truly believe he is trapped?" "I believe," Lady Meredith said calmly, "that he will come to his senses soon enough." Dorothea stared at her in disbelief. "You would destroy Harriet's reputation to prove yourself right?" "If necessary." Silence fell. Lady Meredith rose and swept from the room. Harriet remained seated, frozen. Dorothea knelt beside her chair. "Harry, we will stop her." Harriet shook her head slowly. "No." "Of course we will." "She is already too far gone." Dorothea's voice softened. "You must tell the Duke." Harriet swallowed hard. "No." "Why not?" "Because if my mother is right—" Dorothea grabbed her hand. "She is not right." But Harriet's old fears had already begun creeping back. The old whisper, the old doubt. "Women like you do not marry dukes." An hour later, Harriet made a decision. She hired a hackney carriage and gave the driver the address of Northcliffe House. The Duke was in his study when the butler announced her. He looked genuinely startled when she entered. "Harriet." He stood immediately. Something in her expression must have alarmed him. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. "What has happened?" She stepped back before he could touch her. "Please don't." He stopped instantly. The concern in his eyes deepened. "Tell me." Her voice felt brittle. "I came to release you." The words hung in the air. The Duke did not move. "Release me," he repeated slowly. "Yes." His gaze sharpened. "From what?" "From this." She gestured helplessly between them. "From the courtship." Silence. The Duke's jaw tightened. "And why?" he asked carefully. "Would you wish to do that?" "My mother has contacted Lord Ashby." His eyes went cold. Harriet forced the words out. "She intends for him to claim that I behaved improperly with him years ago." The Duke's expression did not change, but something dangerous flickered beneath the surface. "If he spreads the story at the Petton ball." "He won't." Harriet blinked. "You cannot know that." "I do know." "How?" "Because," the Duke said quietly, "I have already dealt with Ashby." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer. This time she did not move away. "I told you," he said calmly. "I made it my business to know everything about you." "Yes. That includes the truth about the Bancroft ball." Her heart pounded. "Ashby laughed because he was cruel, not because of anything you did." She stared at him. "You knew?" "For years." "And you never—" "I was waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For the moment someone attempted to hurt you again." His voice dropped lower. "Your mother has made a grave mistake." Harriet's pulse thundered. "You sound frighteningly certain." "I am." He reached for her hand. This time she let him take it. "I have spent 8 years preparing to protect you," he said quietly. "Did you truly believe I would allow someone like Ashby to destroy you?" Her vision blurred suddenly. "You mean you're not angry?" "Angry?" His thumb brushed her trembling fingers. "Harriet, I have never been more certain of anything in my life." She exhaled shakily. "I thought you might realize you had chosen the wrong sister." The Duke stared at her. Then he said something that stole the breath from her lungs. "There is no other sister." He lifted her hand to his lips. "There has only ever been you." The Duchess of Petton's ball arrived 3 nights later. London had been speaking of nothing else. 2 rumors dominated every drawing room and carriage ride. First, that the Duke of Northcliffe intended to make an announcement. Second, that Lord Christopher Ashby had returned to the city. Harriet felt both rumors like a weight pressing against her ribs as she descended the grand staircase of Petton House. Her gown shimmered in pale champagne silk. The Duke had sent it with a single note. No more hiding. The ballroom glittered beneath 1,000 candles. Music swelled. Laughter drifted. But when Harriet entered beside the Duke, the room fell strangely quiet. People stared, not past her, at her. For 8 years she had moved through rooms unseen. Now every eye followed her steps. Her hand tightened slightly around the Duke's arm. He noticed immediately. "Breathe," he murmured. "I am breathing." "You are preparing to flee." She exhaled. "You know me too well." "Yes." His voice softened. "I worked very hard to." They reached the edge of the dance floor. The orchestra began a waltz. He turned to her. "Dance with me." She smiled faintly. "You seem to enjoy terrifying society." "I enjoy dancing with my future wife." Her breath caught. "You have not yet asked." "Tonight," he said quietly. Hope fluttered dangerously in her chest. They stepped onto the floor. The waltz carried them into motion. Around them the ton watched openly now. Fans fluttered. Whispers moved like wind through silk. Yet Harriet found herself focusing only on the man guiding her across the polished floor. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly. "Yes." "Of what?" "That all of this will vanish." His expression hardened slightly. "It will not." Before she could answer, a voice cut across the music. "Well, well." Harriet's blood ran cold. Lord Christopher Ashby stood near the edge of the floor. 8 years had not improved him. His once charming smile had soured into something sharp and desperate, and tonight it was directed straight at her. "I had heard rumors," Ashby said loudly, "that Miss Harriet Thorne had captured the attention of a duke." The orchestra faltered. Conversation died. Every guest within earshot turned toward them. Harriet felt the old humiliation rising like a ghost, but this time, she was not alone. The Duke released her waist slowly, then turned. His gray eyes were ice. "You will address Miss Thorne with respect," he said calmly. Ashby laughed. "Respect? My dear Northcliffe, perhaps you should hear a certain story before making plans for marriage." A ripple of tension moved through the crowd. Harriet felt the Duke's hand find hers. Steady, grounding. Ashby stepped forward. 8 years ago, Miss Thorne attempted to secure my attentions rather aggressively. That is enough. The Duke's voice cut through the room like steel. Ashby sneered. "Truth can be uncomfortable." "Truth," the Duke said quietly, is precisely what we will discuss. He stepped forward. The ballroom seemed to shrink around them. I have spent 8 years investigating Lord Ashby's financial affairs, the Duke continued. Ashby blinked. What? I am certain our guests will find the details fascinating. The room held its breath, particularly the gambling debts, the Duke said calmly, and the forged signatures. Ashby's face drained of color, and the rather desperate arrangement he recently made with Lady Harriet Thorne. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Across the ballroom, Harriet saw her mother go pale. Ashby sputtered. You cannot prove. I already have. The Duke produced a folded document. My business associates now hold every debt you owe. Ashby's voice shook. You wouldn't dare! I already did. Silence fell like a curtain. You have 2 choices, the Duke said quietly. You may apologize to Miss Thorne for the lies you intended to tell tonight. He paused. Or you may spend the remainder of your life in debtor's prison. Ashby's bravado collapsed instantly. I apologize, he stammered. The room erupted in whispers. Ashby fled the ballroom moments later. The Duke turned slowly. His gaze moved across the watching crowd, then stopped on Harriet. Something softer replaced the fury in his eyes. He walked back toward her, and before anyone realized what he intended, the Duke of Northcliffe dropped to one knee in the center of the ballroom. A collective gasp swept through the guests. Harriet's heart stopped. He looked up at her. I have waited 8 years, he said quietly, and I refuse to wait another moment. He reached into his coat. A small velvet box appeared in his hand. Harriet Thorne, he said softly, will you marry me? For a moment, Harriet could not breathe. The ballroom seemed to disappear around her. The music, the whispers, the hundreds of watching eyes. None of it mattered. Only the man kneeling before her. Alistair Cavendish, the Duke who had waited 8 years, the man who had seen her when the world refused to look. His gray eyes held hers steadily, not demanding, not pressuring, simply waiting, as though he would kneel there forever if necessary. Harriet felt something inside her shift. 8 years ago, she had stood in a ballroom surrounded by laughter. 8 years ago, she had believed that humiliation defined her. But now, the same world watched again, only this time the silence held something different. Hope. She looked at him, at the powerful man who had rebuilt a ruined estate, at the feared Duke who had just destroyed her enemies without raising his voice, at the man whose hands were trembling very slightly as he held the ring. You have already changed my life, she whispered. A faint smile touched his mouth. I intend to spend the rest of it doing so. Her heart swelled painfully. For 8 years, she said softly, I believed I deserved to disappear. His expression hardened slightly. You never did. But you saw me. Always. The certainty in his voice broke the final fragile wall inside her chest. Harriet laughed softly through sudden tears. Yes, she said. The word barely escaped her lips. Then stronger. Yes. The Duke did not move for a heartbeat, as though he needed to be certain he had heard correctly. Then relief, raw and unmistakable, flooded his expression. He slid the ring onto her finger. The diamond caught the candlelight and scattered it across the room like stars. The ballroom erupted into applause. But Harriet hardly noticed, because Alistair stood and pulled her gently into his arms. Finally, he murmured against her hair. His lips brushed hers. The kiss that followed was not cautious, not polite. It was 8 years of waiting finally breaking free. When they parted, the guests were still clapping. Dorothea was crying openly. Several matrons fanned themselves dramatically, and Lady Harriet Thorne stood near the wall, white with silent fury. Harriet saw her. For the first time in her life, she felt no fear, only distance. Alistair followed her gaze. His arm tightened slightly around her waist. She has no power over you anymore, he said quietly. Harriet nodded. I know. The orchestra began playing again. The Duke took her hand. One more dance, he said softly, before you become the future Duchess of Northcliffe. She smiled. Your obsession is showing again. It never stopped. They stepped onto the floor. The waltz carried them through the candlelit room. This time Harriet did not worry about whispers. She did not search for shadows. She simply danced. And when the music slowed, the Duke leaned close. There is something I have not told you. Oh? His voice softened. I have commissioned another portrait. She laughed. Already? Yes. What does it show? His gray eyes warmed. You. Doing what? Smiling. Harriet looked around the ballroom, at the chandeliers, at the crowd, at the life she had once believed impossible. Then she looked back at him. I suppose I will be doing that often now. That, he said quietly, is the entire plan. and as they danced beneath the glowing chandeliers, Harriet Thorne, who had once spent years fading into the walls, finally allowed herself to be seen forever.